Hey, this is Jordan with Team J's Classroom Fun. Thanks for coming back to my YouTube page. Today, we're going to be continuing our series on math rotations. So make sure you've subscribed and click that bell so you don't miss out on any new content. So I have started a series on math rotations, as you probably know, and we've already covered a few things, but today we're going to be talking about the mini lessons. So mini lesson is one of the first components of the math rotations instruction. Sorry, this is not moving where I want it to move. And so it's going to be that first part of whole group instruction. So we're going to go ahead today and talk about what are some things you could do for your mini lesson as part of your math instruction. So real quick, just to kind of backtrack, the past videos, first one I went over why I switched to math rotations. Then we talked about how I create math pretests and use those. The next one is using those pretests to create your flexible groups. And today we're going to talk about mini lessons. So if you missed any of those other videos, feel free to go back. So mini lessons. The way the math workshop is set up is like a typical kind of workshop of sorts. And for math rotations, what I would do is I have a mini lesson. Then I have where they're in their small groups and they're going through the 4 rotations. And then I have a closing, like a closure to the lesson. So it's a lot like a workshop lesson. It's a lot like a typical lesson, except instead of a ton of whole group instruction, it's a lot more small group based. So the mini lesson happens at the beginning of math time. This introduces typically the topic of the day, and the mini lesson is done whole group. So this is something where it obviously is going to be a little more on grade level. So yes, you might have some kids that know things quickly. You also might have some kids that are a little bit confused and not sure, but that's where then when you go into small group, you're going to be helping with any confusion and things like that for some of the kids that maybe didn't quite understand the mini lesson. So typically we introduce the topic of the day in the mini lesson, and it ranges from 5 to 15 minutes. This obviously depends on the age group of the kids you're teaching. It also depends on the content and it depends on what you're doing for your mini lessons. Some mini lessons will take longer, some will be shorter. Let's look at some examples. So CGI, not the green screen, is cognitively guided instruction. I don't know if this is a term, you know how like education terms keep going around and around and around. Maybe this is one that's not used as commonly anymore. I don't know. But it was something I was trained on a long time ago. And it's all about like making sure kids really have the conceptual understanding down and things like that. So a lot of times I will use my mini lesson, my whole group part of my math rotations to use CGI. And so oftentimes we'll do a number talk. So I'll put up a problem like I did here with the money. It was $24.62 plus $12.21. And then they have to solve it in their mind. And then what they're doing is they're then going to give me a thumbs up when they have their answer. And then I will call on kids and they'll share out their strategies and I write down what they did. So this is a great way for kids to learn from each other. This is also a great way for kids to see different strategies and also to kind of show how there's many ways you can get to a problem. You can do number talks with all kinds of things: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, bigger numbers, smaller numbers, all kinds of things. Choral counting is another one that I will sometimes do, especially in this case here where I was teaching multiplication. So in this one, choral counting is another CGI, like I think routine. So we did like 8 and then 16 and then 24 and 32 and we kept going, right? And so they realized that like each time we were adding 8. So you can see then we then added in the repeated addition of plus 8 plus 8. We also then was like, okay, this is 1 8. This is 2 groups of 8. This is 3 groups of 8. And then this way they could kind of see like, okay, where is the, sorry, I don't want to click ahead. Where is the multiplication coming in? Like how many 8s are we dealing with and that kind of thing. And then you can see as it builds what happens, which is kind of cool. Story problem share out's another thing I do a lot for many lessons. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll pose a problem like on our projector board, like we have little TVs, or not little, but we have TVs that we use. So I will put a word problem like with whatever skill we're working on. And then the kids will go back to their seats and solve it on whiteboards. And then what I'll do is I'll either have the kids, I'll pick a child or two who I see using different strategies to come up and share. They might, like in this one here, show their answer on the board. Maybe they'll bring their whiteboard up and we'll talk through it. But this gives them a chance again to explain their thinking and also practice their math communication skill. And all of these I tie into whatever our lesson is. So like if I'm doing geometry, I'm probably not doing a story problem share out. So you have to kind of tie your mini lesson into whatever your main skill is that day. But these are just some ideas of what you could do. Next thing, anchor charts. I often will use the mini lesson, that beginning part, to create an anchor chart. I like to create them with my class. I know some teachers like to create them ahead of time because they like to do the cutesy writing and the pictures and all that. One, I can't draw, so the cutesy pictures aren't happening. But I really think having the kids help you create it, having them talk you through it, like, work through it with you instead of it just being there, it really helps them understand the content and it really makes them kind of take ownership in the anchor chart and use it more. So I highly recommend making them with your class. They're also really important with rotations. The nice thing about this is when you are working with a small group and you maybe have a group in seat work and maybe they're working on something and they forgot something about this, if you have the anchor chart up that you created, they can then refer back to that anchor chart to get help, or maybe like, oh, I forgot what a nickel's worth, and they can look back at the money anchor chart and see. So these are great to have up, all the time in general, but also during rotations so that kids can kind of refer back to what you went over that day. With mini lessons, I wouldn't necessarily create an anchor chart every day. And I wouldn't do any of these activities every day the same. It's good to kind of mix it up. And again, it's also based on what your skill is. Here are two more examples of anchor charts so you can see the one we were talking about, area and perimeter, and what the difference was between the two and how to find the area and perimeter. And then we also have another anchor chart that we created as a class where we're talking through different strategies you could use for multiplication, as well as talking about the vocabulary of like factors and equal groups and what a product is and things like that. So mini lessons, you also can add in items from your school specific curriculum. I've been at a few different schools, and so every school kind of uses a different program or curriculum. Sometimes you have to follow it more than others, so you definitely can still use it. Right now we're using investigations, and I often will see what their mini lesson is or their kind of like introduction to the lesson is, and I will include it or incorporate it in my mini lesson in some way. So you definitely can still tie in the resources you have. This is not you having to create everything from scratch, okay? Whiteboard practice is another thing. So again, depending on the skill, I might have the kids bring their whiteboards down and solve a few problems. Videos would be another thing, like Brain Pop Junior, or sometimes I know the programs, like I know we use Savvis as well, and they have some videos that you can show. Books is another thing. There's tons of great math books written out there that can be a really fun way to introduce something, especially if it's like a new skill like graphing or something. And so you could use those for your mini lesson as well. The other thing I do in the mini lesson is I explain the rotations for the day. So as you can see, I do use 4 rotations, and so this would be my time to go over it. Teacher time is always with me. Tech time tends to be the same kind of activities, just maybe a different thing they're doing on there. And then the other 2 activities are different depending on what's happening. And I'll show you another example or two. Sometimes it's story problems, sometimes they're doing, puzzles and flashcards, different things, okay? So with this is my chance to say, okay, hey, when you go to this station, this is what you're doing. Sometimes I will have repeat activities, especially like games and things, because then the kids already know how to play it. So I like to spiral back on some of those as well. So this is more of like a typical one where they'd come to me for teacher time, then they go to seat work or their seat practice where they're doing some independent practice of the skill. Then they would move on to the game and activity, which is the cupcake money for this one. And then they'd move on to the technology piece where they're practicing or doing like extra math or something like that. So I would go over that. Now, the going over it can't take 20 minutes, right? So that's where, again, once you get in the hang of it and once they get in the rhythm of this, it does go a lot faster. Okay, so next time we're going to talk more about the rotation process and how that all works and how I kind of set that up. So I will be seeing you then. If you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to leave them in the comments, or again, you can find me over on Instagram on Team J's Classroom Fun. I will talk to you later.